I used to believe that honesty could fix anything. If you told the truth, stayed loyal, worked hard, and kept your heart clean, then life would somehow make sense. Turns out I was wrong, because sometimes silence speaks louder than truth, and sometimes the person you die for, the one you trust with every corner of your heart, uses that love like a weapon and turns it against you. That realization didn't come to me in one big, dramatic explosion. It came quietly on a cold February morning in Asheville, North Carolina, a morning that felt so ordinary. I never would have guessed it was the beginning of the end. The air was sharp, metallic, the kind that bites the back of your throat when you breathe too deep. The mountains were half hidden in a thin fog, and the ground still glittered with frost that hadn't yet melted from the night before. I remember thinking it was a good day to work, cold enough to keep the men moving, bright enough to feel alive. I stood there in the gravel lot of Rains and Sons Contracting, my construction company. 15 years I'd built that business with my own 2 hands. 15 years of missed dinners, late nights, sweat-soaked shirts, and early mornings before the sun even had the decency to show up. Back when I started, I didn't have much, just an old pickup, a rusted toolbox, and a promise to myself that I'd never be the kind of man who quit when things got hard. My dad raised me that way. Work's the only prayer that gets answered, he used to say. So I worked through storms, through winters, through broken bones and busted contracts. And after all those years, I finally had something solid, a team that trusted me, a reputation built on sweat and fairness, and most of all, a family that I thought I was protecting. That morning, the guys were loading up the trucks for a big remodel project. They were joking around. Someone had brought donuts. Someone else was complaining about the cold. The usual chatter of men who knew how to find humor in the grind. And standing right beside me, holding a paper cup of coffee with that half smile of hers, was Lydia, my wife, my partner, my anchor in a world that never slowed down. She looked beautiful that morning, like she always did. Even in her work coat and messy bun, she had that effortless grace, the kind that made people stop mid-sentence when she walked into a room. There was something quiet about her beauty, something patient. She never raised her voice, never needed to. Lydia had this way of making you feel like she understood you better than you understood yourself. She was sipping her coffee, eyes scanning the job sheets I'd left on the hood of my truck. The morning light caught the side of her face, and for a second, I thought about how lucky I was. Then she said something that I didn't understand until much later. She looked up at me, brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and said softly, "You always care too much. Tom, one day that's gonna break you." I remember laughing, a little confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. She smiled, that same calm smile she always had, the kind that hides more than it shows. "Oh, nothing," she said. "Just you take things too personally. You give too much of yourself." Back then, it sounded like concern, like she was just looking out for me. Now, looking back, I realize it was more like a warning. But I didn't hear it that way. I just smiled, kissed her cheek, and said, "Guess that's just who I am." She didn't respond, just looked away toward the horizon, eyes distant, like her mind was somewhere I couldn't follow. I should have noticed the signs. Then, the way her phone never left her hand anymore. The way her laughter, once bright and easy, had started to fade into something polite and hollow. The way she suddenly had late closings at her real estate office almost every other night, but I was too busy keeping my promises, too busy being the man I thought she needed at work. I had a new partner, Evan. He was the kind of guy who could sell ice to a snowman, sharp dresser, polished talker, college degree from Chapel Hill. Where I was grit, he was charm. He could talk clients into doubling their budgets while I was still trying to make sure we didn't overspend on concrete. He came on board a few years ago, and I'll admit it, he helped the company grow. He had ideas, energy, connections, and I was grateful for that. But there was something about him I could never quite trust. Something too smooth. Like a salesman who never stops smiling, even when you tell him no. Still, I ignored it, because we were making money, because Lydia said he was good for business, because, in her words, he's exactly what you need. Tom, someone who balances you out. At the time, I thought she meant for the company, Now I know. She meant for herself. I started noticing small things that didn't fit. Evan showing up at our house unannounced, always with some urgent paperwork. Lydia needed to sign, or the way they'd share inside jokes I didn't understand, or how she'd light up just a little too much when he walked in the room. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid, that I was just tired from all the work, from carrying the weight of too much responsibility. But deep down I felt it, that slow, creeping sense that something sacred was slipping through my fingers. You know how betrayal feels before you even know what it is? It's not a sound or a sight, it's a change in temperature. It's the silence after a laugh that used to feel warm. It's the way I met Lydia 25 years ago, back when my world was still rough around the edges. It was the spring after my first divorce, and I was a man trying to remember what it felt like to breathe without guilt. You don't realize how heavy a broken marriage can be until you finally walk away from it, how it lingers like the smell of smoke after a house fire. Back then, I wasn't looking for love. Hell, I wasn't looking for anything, just a quiet life. A simple rhythm, someone to share a morning coffee with, maybe talk about the weather, maybe not talk at all. And then Lydia walked in. I first saw her at a property showing outside Black Mountain, one of those big fancy lakefront homes I could never afford but loved to look at. She was a realtor, young, polished, confident in a way that didn't shout but whispered. Her voice was soft, her eyes sharp, and there was something about the way she carried herself, like she'd already figured out the whole damn world and was just waiting for the rest of us to catch up. She wasn't loud or flashy, not the kind of woman who filled a room with noise. She had this quiet confidence, a calm you could feel standing next to her. After years of arguments and walking on eggshells with my ex, that calm felt like a miracle. I remember she wore a gray blazer and jeans that day. Nothing fancy. She smiled at me as she handed me a brochure, her nails neat. Her handshake firm but warm, and for a reason I still can't explain. I felt something settle inside me, like maybe this was a person I could build a life with, not just chase one. We started talking about little things at first, houses, work, the town, the weather. She told me she liked the smell of new wood and fresh paint because it reminded her of potential, of beginnings. I laughed and said I liked those smells because they meant I still had a job. Something about that made her laugh too. And it wasn't a polite laugh. It was real. Open like sunlight breaking through clouds. That laugh stayed with me. We started seeing each other after that. Dinners. Walks, long drives with no destination. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't play games. She was steady. And after what I'd been through, steady was all I wanted. Within a year, we were married. We bought a little house near the mountains. A fixer-upper with peeling paint and a porch that creaked when you walked across it. I remember telling her, "Give me a year and I'll make this place feel brand new." She smiled and said, "Tom, I don't need brand new. I just need honest," and I believed her. God, I believed her. Those early years were good, simple, peaceful. We didn't have much money, but we had enough. We'd sit on the porch at night drinking cheap wine, planning the future, talking about where we'd be in 10 years. Every paycheck I earned, every blueprint I drew, every idea I chased, it was all for her. Every nail I hammered, every late night I worked, I saw her face at the finish line. When I decided to start my own construction company, she was the first person I told. We were sitting at the kitchen table, papers scattered everywhere, me scribbling figures on the back of an envelope. I told her I wanted to build something real, something that had my name on it, something I could pass down one day. She didn't hesitate, she just said, "If anyone can do it, Tom, it's you. You don't quit." And that was all I needed, so I took a loan, sold my truck, and built Rains and Sons Contracting from the ground up. It was just me and 3 guys at first, driving around in beat-up pickups, patching roofs, framing walls, fixing whatever needed fixing. Lydia handled the books. I handled the work. We made a good team. At least, that's what everyone said. People in town started calling us the perfect pair. The husband who could build anything, and the wife who could keep the numbers straight. And honestly, for a long time it felt like we were exactly that. We worked side by side for years, saving every dime, building a reputation brick by brick. Clients trusted us. Employees respected us. and every success felt like a joint, victory like we were climbing the same mountain together. But success has a strange way of changing people, doesn't it? Sometimes it changes you. Sometimes it changes the person beside you, and sometimes you're so busy climbing that you don't notice who stopped walking beside you until you reach the top alone. As the company grew, I got busier. Longer hours, bigger projects, more pressure. There were weeks I'd leave before sunrise and come home after midnight, too tired to even talk. Lydia would be sitting at the dining table, laptop open, glass of wine half full, the glow of spreadsheets lighting her face. She'd smile when I walked in, ask how the day went, then go right back to her work, and I told myself that was normal. That was what growth looked like. That's what successful couples did. They hustled, they sacrificed, they endured. But in trying to prove I could be a good man, a good husband, a good provider, I stopped being present, I stopped listening, and she stopped waiting for me to. I didn't see it then. Not the distance creeping in, not the walls going up, but I can see it clearly now. There were signs, small ones. Her eyes didn't light up when I told her about a new contract. Her laughter became shorter, her hugs stiffer. When she said, "I love you," it sounded like a habit. Not a truth. I thought maybe it was just stress, money worries, work exhaustion. Marriage ebbs and flows, right? So I ignored it, believing that if I just worked harder, earned more, gave her everything she wanted, the warmth would come back, and for a while, I truly believed it did, until Evan walked into our lives. He came to me through a referral, a client's nephew, fresh out of business school, ambitious, confident, dressed like he belonged in a boardroom instead of a job site. From the moment he shook my hand, I could tell he wasn't like the men I usually hired. He didn't have calloused palms or dust on his boots, but he had a way with words. He could charm a room in seconds, make clients feel like they'd known him for years. He talked big, contracts, expansions, public bids, things I'd never had time to think about because I was too busy making sure walls were straight and roofs didn't leak. He called me old school, but he said it with respect. And for a man like me, that meant something. Lydia liked him immediately, said he was smart, motivated, exactly what the company needs. She started having meetings with him about budgets and projections, things I didn't fully understand but trusted her to handle. So when she suggested I make him a partner, I didn't question it. I thought, maybe she's right, maybe this is what growth looks like, trusting new blood, expanding the circle. So I gave him a chance, and for a while, it seemed like the best decision I'd ever made. We landed government contracts, school renovations, city projects. Money started flowing in like never before. We upgraded our trucks, hired new crews, even moved into a bigger office downtown. It felt like we were unstoppable. But somewhere in all that success, I noticed something shift. Lydia stopped waiting for me at night, stopped asking when I'd be home. Her phone buzzed more often, and she'd step outside to answer it. When I'd walk in the room, she'd close her laptop a little too quickly, and whenever I asked what she was working on, she'd smile and say, "Just numbers, Tom. You wouldn't care about this stuff." And I'd nod, because she was probably right. I didn't know accounting. I didn't know how to read those spreadsheets. I just knew how to build. That was my world. Hands, tools, structure. But her world was starting to move in directions I couldn't follow. I'd come home from a 14-hour day, covered in sawdust, and she'd be sitting at the table, glass of wine in hand, scrolling through her phone. I'd try to tell her about a new client, or how one of the guys nearly cut his hand off with a saw, and she'd nod without really hearing me. And then she'd say, "You're just tired. Tom, don't overthink everything." I believed her, because I wanted to, because love makes you blind, especially when you think. You ever notice how rot doesn't announce itself? It starts as a faint smell, a whisper, something small you can ignore, until one day, it's all you can smell. That's how it began for me. At first, it was little things, numbers that didn't match, a receipt here, a missing invoice there. We were working on a big contract that year, a renovation project for the county library, a 6-figure deal that was supposed to set us up for the next few years. But something about the reports didn't sit right. Payments were delayed, expenses inflated, checks marked pending. When I asked Evan about it, He laughed, and that easy, practiced laugh of his. Tom, man, you worry too much. We're making money faster than we can count it. I'll sort it out Monday. And Lydia, she backed him up every single time. Evan's on top of it, she'd say, shuffling papers. You should focus on the job sites. Let me handle the books. I told myself that was teamwork, that was trust, but now when I look back, I realize that was the moment they learned how easy it was to lie to me. The next few weeks, things got stranger. I'd call the office during the day, and the line would be busy for hours. Sometimes, I'd stop by unannounced and Lydia's desk would be empty. Her computer screen black. Evan's door would be closed, voices murmuring inside. When I walked in, they'd stop talking like a movie pause mid-scene. Everything okay? I'd ask. Evan would grin. Just boring accounting stuff, boss. And Lydia would look at me, too quickly, too calmly. Yes, just sorting invoices, it's funny. The human brain knows when something's wrong. It's the heart that refuses to listen. One Thursday, I remember walking into the office with a box of donuts, trying to lighten the mood. Business had been good. I'd just signed a deal for a school renovation in Hendersonville, and I wanted to celebrate. But when I stepped inside, I froze. The door to the back office was cracked open, and I heard laughter. Not just friendly laughter, that soft, low kind you only share when there's something secret underneath. Evan's voice came first, then Lydia's. I didn't move. Just stood there in the hallway holding that damn box of donuts, listening to the sound of my wife laughing with another man, in my office. I told myself I was crazy, that they were friends, colleagues, but something deep inside me, that old, quiet instinct that comes before everything falls apart, whispered, "You already know." Later that night, I asked Lydia if everything was okay between us. She looked at me with that same blank softness, the kind people use when they've already checked out. "Tom, you're just tired. You've been working too much." "I'm working for us," I said. She smiled. Small, cold. "I know, but maybe you should start working for you." That sentence hit harder than any betrayal could. It sounded like advice, but it felt like distance. I didn't realize it then. But she was already gone, just waiting for me to catch up. Over the next few months, I started noticing more cracks, literal and emotional, tools missing from the warehouse, payments sent to accounts I didn't recognize. Evan started showing up in a new truck. Lydia started wearing new jewelry. When I asked where the money came from, they both gave the same answer. Bonuses. Smart investments, but I never saw the receipts. I told myself to trust them, because that's what love is, right? Believing even when you shouldn't. But that kind of trust doesn't build, it blinds, and I was already neck deep in the darkness. I refused to see. Then came the night that changed everything. Was supposed to be out of town on a job inspection, but a storm hit early, and I came home a day sooner. It was around 8 p.m. when I pulled into the driveway. Lydia's car was there. Evan's too. For a second, I thought maybe they were working late, catching up on numbers. But when I walked in, the house was quiet. Too quiet. There was a glass of wine on the counter, half full. Her favorite kind, 2 plates in the sink. Candles burned down to stubs. And from down the hallway, muffled voices. My heart started pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then I turned away. I walked out that door, and 2 months later, everything I had been trying to hold together finally crumbled. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, merciless thud. It was a Thursday. Gray sky, drizzle hanging in the air. The kind of day where you can taste the storm before it hits. I was late for a client meeting downtown, rushing through traffic, half focused on my phone when I saw it. Lydia's car. At first, it didn't register. I almost drove past it. The silver Honda she loved so much, parked outside a little diner off Biltmore Avenue. The same diner where we used to have breakfast every Sunday before life got too busy. And then I saw her. Through the window, sitting in the booth near the corner, laughing. She hadn't laughed like that in months. Not with me, at least. And across from her, Evan. He was leaning forward, that charming smile plastered on his face, the one that used to win clients. But the way he looked at her, that wasn't business. That wasn't friendship, that was something else, something intimate, familiar, wrong. Her hand was on his, and for a second, time just stopped. The world outside the diner blurred. The traffic noise disappeared. It was just them. Two people who had taken my trust, my loyalty, my life's work, and turned it into a stage for their little secret play. I didn't storm in, didn't shout, didn't throw open the door and make a scene like you'd expect a betrayed man to do. Instead, I just stood there on the sidewalk, hands in my jacket pockets, feeling the weight of everything I'd ever built start to sink inside me. Every brick I laid, every contract I signed, every hour I worked, all of it suddenly looked foolish. You ever have that moment when the story you've been living in, the one you thought was real, starts to flicker like a bad movie reel, and you finally see the scratches on the film? That was my moment. I walked back to my truck. The rain had picked up, steady, cold, merciless. I sat there watching them through the windshield, the wipers smearing everything into a gray blur. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel angry. I felt empty. Because betrayal isn't just about the act. It's about what it takes from you. It steals your reflection, your sense of who you are. I kept asking myself, when did I lose her? Was it when I worked late? When I trusted too much? Or when I believed love was strong enough to keep her? Maybe it wasn't one moment. Maybe it was all of them. Tiny fractures that built into a fault line. They left the diner after an hour. He opened her door. She laughed again. That soft laugh that used to belong to me. They drove off together. I didn't follow, didn't call, didn't text. I just sat there for a long time, the engine running. Rain dripping down the windshield like slow tears. I kept replaying everything in my mind, the late nights, the missed calls, the fake smiles. All the time she said, "You're imagining things," and I realized she hadn't just betrayed me, she'd made me doubt myself. That's the cruelest part. When someone you love so deeply convinces you your instincts are wrong until you forget how to trust your own eyes. When I finally got home that night, the house felt different, still quiet, hollow, like it already knew what had happened before I did. I sat in the dark for hours. No TV, no lights, just the ticking of the old wall clock echoing through the room. At around midnight, the door opened. Her footsteps, light, steady, unhurried, crossed the hardwood floor. She didn't notice me sitting there at first. "Lydia," I said. My voice came out calm, steady, almost too calm. She froze. "Did you love me, Lydia? Or just the life I gave you?" She didn't answer. She turned toward me, her face pale, her lips parting like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Her eyes met mine, and I swear, I could see it. That quiet confession she didn't have the courage to say out loud. She didn't need to. I already knew. There was no fury in me then. Just this strange, cold clarity. Because sometimes, silence tells the whole story. She walked past me into the bedroom, closed the door softly behind her, and I just sat there on the couch, staring at the empty space she left behind. The lamp's reflection glimmered on the window, and for a split second, I saw myself in it, not the man I used to be, just a shell. You know what's strange? That night I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't break anything. I just breathed. Slow, heavy, like someone learning how to exist again after losing everything that defined him. The next morning she was gone before I woke up. No note. No explanation, just silence, and her wedding ring on the kitchen table. The house smelled like her perfume for days after. That soft jasmine scent that used to make me feel at home. Now made me sick. I stood in that kitchen staring at that ring, realizing something brutal. Love doesn't end when someone betrays you. It just turns into something unrecognizable, something sharp, something you can't put down, even when it's cutting you. That was the night the mask fell off. After that night in the diner, I stopped pretending the pieces fit. I stopped smiling like everything was fine. Instead, I went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that's empty and helpless. This was deliberate, slow, careful. I became a man who watched the world through the smallest of cracks. I watched papers. I watched screens. I watched the faces of people who used to be mine. It started with small things I could access without raising alarms. I opened folders on my office computer that I'd never had to look at because Lydia handled them. I skimmed through invoices while the crew hammered out drywall downtown. I scrolled through old emails, the kind I had never thought to read because trust had been my default setting. At first, I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that maybe I'd misread a number, misremembered a date. But the more I looked, the colder the air became. There were missing amounts in vendor payments, credits that didn't line up with work done, invoices with vendor names I'd never heard of. Little line items with odd digits. Payments routed to accounts that had nothing to do with suppliers. A pattern emerged when you stare at the same sheet of paper long enough. The weird vendors, the repeated same account number masked with different names, transfers timed right after payroll. It looked sloppy in a way that told me it was deliberate, sloppy to hide what was deliberate underneath. Evan always had been smooth with words, and he had been smooth with numbers too when he wanted to look that way. He'd thrown around phrases like account consolidation and streamlined vendor management in meetings, buzzwords that made clients nod. And Lydia, trusting in that polished voice, signed off on the paperwork, or so it appeared. But what I found were signatures that had my name, approval codes that matched my login, authorizations that implied I had seen the transfers. In a business where I'd done the fieldwork and she handled the books, those marks were like knives. I dug deeper. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't storm into the office and accuse them like some movie husband. I sat at my dining table at night, the house cold and echoing, and pulled records into order. I printed bank statements. I taped documents together. I made ledger copies and lined them up on the floor like evidence. The truth, when you lay it out in front of you, is quite methodical. You can almost watch the picture form. Here a payment, there an anonymous vendor, then a transfer routed through a different state, then a withdrawal. You trace the money like a map. And the map led right to them. It wasn't an affair alone. God, that would have been a simpler, uglier thing to swallow. This was something else. This was betrayal in spreadsheets and authorization codes. They'd been funneling money out of the company for nearly a year, hiding it under names like local supply or consulting fee. In reality, those were shell vendors set up to receive funds. Over time, the amounts added up. Small sums at first, barely noticeable if you weren't watching. Then larger transfers, timed to when I was in the field, scheduled on nights I was at a job site miles away. By the time I had the whole pattern laid out, the ledger read like a sentence. Over $420,000 missing. I remember the exact instant I found the first forged approval with my name. It was like stepping into a cold room. My hands went numb. I could taste metal at the back of my throat. There it was. My signature, my initials, my login code stamped next to transfers I had never authorized. Lydia had used my credentials, forged my approval lines on the paperwork, and Evan had run with it. They trusted each other that much. They trusted each other enough to use my trust like a shield. I confronted them the way men in this part of the world sometimes do. Not with cops or lawyers flashing at first, but with the weight of what I knew and the emptiness of the man that knowledge made me. I didn't do it in the office. I waited until the house was dark and the world felt like an audience of one. She came in late that night, the same slow footsteps, the same casual, soft voice. I stood in the kitchen, the papers folded in my fist. I watched her put her keys down, watched the way she moved, comfortable as if she'd never done anything wrong. I tried to keep my voice even when I said her name. Lydia, I said, simple. It didn't need more, her face didn't change. She looked at me as if I'd asked about the weather. Then I unfolded the documents and let them settle like snow on the table between us. I told her what I'd found. I told her about the accounts, the vendors, the transfers. I told her I had found my own signature on approvals I never made. The room closed in. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. She didn't cry. She didn't even look ashamed. The first thing she did was pin it back on me in the most venomous way possible. Soft, precise, like pressing a blade. You never listened, Tom. You never noticed what I needed. It wasn't a denial. It was a reprimand. She blamed me for not seeing the holes in my own life, for not noticing her wants, for giving her a life that apparently wasn't enough. Can you imagine that? After everything, the person who stole from you turning it into a sermon about your failings. That line broke something inside me in a way nobody could stitch back together. I felt every sacrifice I had made suddenly counted for nothing. Years of work and loyalty, And here she was, framing my devotion as a crime against her happiness. I wanted to throw the papers in the air, to shout until the ceiling cracked. Instead, something colder took over. The fury receded and something clinical stepped in. I could see the shape of a plan forming in the space grief left behind. I walked out that night. I didn't slam doors or make a scene. There's nothing theatrical about the real end of things. I left calmly, like I was stepping into a different part of the same story. The air outside was sharp and tasted like frost. I stood in the driveway with my jacket zipped up, letting the cold work through me. People imagine vengeance as noise, as headlights, as dramatic confrontations. That wasn't mine. My revenge would not be At the same time, I started collecting more evidence: emails, texts, bank printouts, signatures. I found little things that tied the shell companies to accounts in another state, and accounts to a small investment firm that liked to stay in the shadows. I pulled together months of transactions and cross-checked timestamps. A transfer scheduled at 2:13 a.m.? That was the night I was on a job site in Morganton. A deposit matching the price of a piece of jewelry Lydia had been wearing. The trail was there for anyone with the patience to follow it. I also hired help, but not the way most people think of help. I found a retired auditor who knew how to follow money, a guy with a face weathered by years of seeing people lie to themselves. He worked quietly, like I asked, digging into tax filings and vendor registration forms. We met in parking lots, in diners, in my truck while the engine idled. He showed me documents I couldn't have found on my own, papers that connected corporate shells to the accounts Evan favored. He showed me the perfect crime through the eyes of someone who'd unearthed 1,000 imperfect ones. When you collect evidence, you don't do it to rub someone's face in it. You do it to be sure. You do it so that when the world turns and asks for proof, you don't fumble for answers. And so I prepared, quietly, methodically, without a word. People who betray think their silence covers them. They don't realize silence can be kept like a vault and opened at the perfect time. There's a moment in the collapse when you realize the person you loved used your love like a cloak. That moment is a kind of grief that doesn't make a sound. It's not explosive. It is a steady, icy compression, like being squeezed into a shape you don't recognize. That night, with the folder of paper on my lap and the heater clicking behind me, I felt that compression. I also felt something else, an odd, almost peaceful clarity. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I would do what was right. I would peel the paper back, follow the money, and let the truth do the rest. So I walked into the cold night and made a vow that my response would be silence packed with consequence. I promised myself I would not let their lies define the rest of my life. They'd taken money. They'd used my name. They'd weaponized my love. But they had not yet taken my patience or my capacity to plan. And there, under the low hum of the streetlights and the distant sound of a city that didn't care, I started to build the quiet that would undo them. That silence wasn't peace. It was war disguised as calm. For weeks I lived like a ghost inside my own house, the one Lydia and I had built together, the one that now felt like a museum of broken vows. Her laughter used to fill those walls. Now every echo of her footsteps felt like an accusation. She still slept on her side of the bed, pretending nothing had changed, pretending I didn't know. That's the thing about guilt. It makes people act like the truth can be ignored if no one speaks it aloud. But I had learned something about silence. It's not emptiness. It's control. Silence forces people to face their own echoes, so I let her talk. Every morning she'd come down in her robe, pour her coffee, and ask, "You going to the site today?" And I'd nod, that was all. No arguments, no accusations, no begging for reasons. Meanwhile, every night, I sat at my desk reviewing the chain of documents I'd created, cross-checking signatures, verifying timestamps, making sure every forged approval was linked directly to her. My lawyer, Sandra, said, "Tom, once this hits, it'll bury them. You'll lose the company, but they'll lose everything." And I remember saying quietly, "I already lost everything, Sandra. Now it's just about truth." But truth didn't mean shouting it from rooftops, no. Truth meant letting their lies collapse under their own weight. Evan, of course, had no clue. He walked around like a peacock, bragging about the big city deal, telling investors it was his move that brought it in. The man had an ego the size of a crane arm, and I was tightening the bolts one by one. Lydia kept up appearances too, charity luncheons, smiling at neighbors, acting like the perfect wife. I could see the faint tremor in her hands, though. Maybe she sensed something. Maybe she didn't. Either way, the plan was already in motion. The documents were clean, meant on the surface. But hidden in the metadata, each file carried digital footprints, timestamps that matched the fraudulent transactions she and Evan had executed months ago. The same fake vendors, the same bank routes, the same forged initials. Sandra called it a silent confession written in numbers. And every morning I'd go to work, pretending to be tired, distracted, broken. I let them think they'd won. Because in betrayal, arrogance is the bait, and I needed them to bite hard. By the time the auditors reached out to Evan for questioning, I was already 2 steps away, legally severed from any liability. My name was clean, theirs wasn't. The silence grew heavy in our house. Lydia stopped humming when she cooked. She started locking her phone, double-checking her emails. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring at me across the dinner table, like she wanted to ask what I knew but didn't dare. I'd meet her eyes, calm and steady, and simply say, "Long day at work." And then I'd walk away. She wanted a reaction. She wanted my anger, my heartbreak, something to confirm that I was still the man she could manipulate. But I gave her nothing. That's the thing about silence. It turns power into patience. Weeks turned into months. The audit expanded. Investigators started showing up at the office. Lydia began working from home more often, and Evan stopped answering my calls. I remember one night, it was late, maybe past midnight. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed, shaking. She said softly, "Tom, if I made mistakes, I just wanted to feel seen again." Her voice trembled, and for a second, I saw the woman I used to love, the one who believed in us before greed hollowed her out. I didn't answer, because forgiveness spoken too soon becomes a weapon turned against you. Instead, I stood, put on my coat, and walked out into the night. The air was cold, the kind of cold that burns your lungs and clears your head. That's when I realized my silence wasn't just a plan anymore. It was my freedom. For years I'd talked, reasoned, explained, trying to save a love that had already died. But the moment I stopped talking, the lies started talking for themselves. The auditors uncovered the entire scheme, the transfers, the shell companies, the falsified invoices. Evan was caught first. He tried to pin everything on Lydia, but she had already signed too much. The evidence was undeniable. The day the arrests were made, I was at the job site, hammering a beam into place. One of the workers ran up with a phone, breathless. "Boss, turn on the news." There they were. Evan and Lydia, handcuffed, surrounded by reporters, faces pale and exposed. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood there and breathed. 15 years of noise, arguments, explanations, apologies, had finally gone quiet. That's what silence does when it's earned. It doesn't shout victory, it simply ends the war. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over. Because revenge might give you justice, but it never gives you peace. And peace, I'd come to learn, doesn't come from punishing the ones who hurt you. It comes from becoming untouchable to their kind of pain. That was the day I buried my past without saying a single word. And for the first time in years, the silence finally felt like home. The morning the world fell apart for them began just like any other. Cold sunlight spilling through the office blinds. The faint smell of coffee brewing. The hum of printers and nail guns from the warehouse next door. If you had walked into Rains and Sons that day, you'd have thought it was just another Tuesday, but I knew it wasn't. Because that morning I'd ironed my shirt, polished my boots, and walked into the building like a man returning to the scene of a war he'd already won. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for the state auditors to finish connecting the dots. Forensic accountants had mapped out every forged invoice, every ghost vendor, every signature Lydia and Evan had created under my nose. Every dollar stolen was now a nail in their own coffin. Carefully, silently hammered in by the hands of their own arrogance. By 9:15 a.m., 2 unmarked sedans pulled up outside the office. I recognized the license plates, government issue. Inside were 3 auditors and a state investigator named Carter. I'd met him once before when I turned over the evidence. A quiet man, sharp eyes, no taste for drama, perfect for what was about to unfold. I didn't call Lydia or Evan to warn them. I just stood near the reception window, coffee in hand, watching as the cars parked, engines idling. When Evan walked in a few minutes later, wearing his usual navy suit and that smug half grin, I almost pitied him. Almost. He strutted past me, patting my shoulder like we were still partners. Big day today, huh? Got that meeting with the city rep later. Let's make this deal sing. I just nodded, staring at him for a moment too long. He didn't notice. People like him never notice the quiet before the thunder. Lydia came in 10 minutes later. Tight bun, black blazer, pretending not to be tired, though the purple circles beneath her eyes betrayed her. She didn't look at me. Not once. But I noticed the way her hands shook slightly as she logged into her computer. She'd heard the whispers. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know how close it was. At 10:02 a.m., the door opened again, and in came Carter with 2 uniformed officers and a woman from the Department of Revenue. He didn't announce himself dramatically. He just stepped forward, handed me a folder, and said quietly, "Mr. Rains, thank you for your cooperation." That was the moment Evan's smile cracked. "Cooperation? What's going on?" he asked, laughing nervously. The woman stepped forward. Voice calm but firm. "Mr. Evan Moore, Mrs. Lydia Rains. We have a warrant to seize all company records, computers, and assets related to case number 4318B. You are both under investigation for financial fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying official documents." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive. It buzzed like electricity. Evan's mouth opened, closed. He looked around the room like he was searching for a hidden camera. "This has to be a mistake. Tom, tell them." "You know this isn't." I set my coffee down, met his eyes, and said evenly, "You wanted to build something without me. Evan, now you can build your defense." He froze. Lydia's face went pale, her lips parted, trembling. She didn't even try to speak. The officers moved through the office with quiet efficiency. Laptops, file boxes, external drives. Everything that had once been ours was now evidence. I stood near the doorway watching it all unfold, feeling nothing. No triumph, no rage, just a deep, hollow calm. Evan tried to grab my arm as they cuffed him. "Tom, you set this up. You can't do this to us." I looked at him like a stranger. "I didn't do anything to you." "Evan, you did this to yourself." Lydia finally looked up then. Her eyes were wet, wide, searching mine for mercy that no longer existed. "Tom," she whispered, "please, don't let them take me like this." "Not here." Her voice cracked on the word please, but it didn't reach me. Because I remembered every time I'd begged her to tell me the truth, every night I'd waited for her to come home, every lie she'd smoothed over with a smile. I simply said, "You made your choices, Lydia. I just stopped cleaning up after them." The officers guided her past me, her wrists cuffed in front of her, her hair falling loose over her face. She didn't look back again. Evan shouted something, my name maybe, but the sound faded as they were led out into the cold daylight. When the door closed, the silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I walked over to Lydia's desk, still neat, still smelling faintly of her perfume. On the corner sat the framed photo of us from years ago, the groundbreaking ceremony for our first office. She was smiling in that picture, holding my hand, the world still innocent behind her. I picked up the frame, stared at it for a long time, then turned it face down. That was the moment I realized something profound. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it looks like paperwork, signatures and quiet mornings that lead to loud endings. By noon, the company's name had been stripped from the door. By evening, local news stations were running the story. Prominent Asheville construction firm under investigation for large-scale embezzlement. Neighbors started calling. Former clients, even friends who hadn't spoken to me in years. I didn't answer any of them. I drove home, parked in the driveway, and sat there for a long time watching the sunset smear red across the mountains. That house, the one I'd built with my own hands, felt both like a monument and a grave. Inside, the silence greeted me like an old friend. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like truth. They had used my love as a weapon, but in the end, Silence was the bullet they never saw coming, and I pulled the trigger without saying a word. The weeks that followed felt like standing in the middle of a burned field, the smoke still hanging, the ashes still warm. Everything familiar was gone, but the silence had weight like a pause between storms. The company didn't just take a hit, it crumbled. Clients who'd once trusted me with million-dollar projects started pulling out. Some called with cautious sympathy, others didn't bother pretending. The whispers traveled faster than truth ever could. Tom Raines's company went down in scandal. They didn't know the real story. They didn't care. For the first few months, I kept showing up to that empty office anyway. Just me and a couple of loyal old-timers, the kind of guys who'd been with me since I could barely afford coffee for the crew. We'd strip out drywall, haul lumber, patch up what we could. No meetings, no boardrooms, no invoices flying across fancy desks, just honest sweat again. I'd forgotten what that felt like. The sound of nails being driven in by hand, the smell of sawdust on clean air, the way a wall comes alive when you raise it yourself. It was humbling and strangely healing, but it wasn't easy. For months, every job felt like I was trying to rebuild a ghost. The name Raines and Sons didn't mean much anymore. Half the town avoided saying it, as if speaking it would curse their next contract. I remember one morning standing outside the job site watching my reflection in the dusty window of my old truck. My hands were cracked and rough again, just like when I first started out 20 years earlier. The only difference was the lines on my face. Each one carried a memory, a lesson, a scar that no one could see but me. That's the thing about revenge, Rose. It gives you back control, but it doesn't give you back time. And time. That's the real currency. I rebuilt slowly, no partners this time. No shortcuts, just hard work and a promise to myself that everything I built from now on would stand on truth, even if it stood alone. There were nights, though, when I'd catch myself thinking about Lydia. Not with anger, that burned out long ago. More like curiosity. Where was she now? Did she ever look back and realize what she'd thrown away? Or did she just move on, weaving new lies in some other town to someone else who hadn't learned what I had? I never looked her up. Didn't read the court updates or follow the outcomes. I didn't need to, because their downfall wasn't my closure. My silence was. Evan lost everything. The cars, the house, the reputation he loved more than air. Lydia. She vanished into the noise. I heard rumors she left the state after the settlement. Maybe remarried. Maybe didn't, but by then it didn't matter. See, when people talk about revenge, they think it ends with someone getting what they deserve. But the truth is, revenge has a cost, and sometimes the bill comes due long after you've won. For me, the cost was trust. I couldn't let anyone close again. Every new face felt like a threat wrapped in a smile. I stopped going to dinners, stopped answering calls from old friends who said things like, "Man, you're doing great now." They didn't know the quiet that followed success, the kind that rings in your chest when the day's work is done and there's no one waiting on the porch light. I started spending more time out by the mountains. There's this ridge outside Asheville where the air feels untouched, and the sunsets cut through the clouds like gold fire. I'd drive up there after work, sit on the hood of my truck, and just breathe. No phone, no plans. No noise. Just the kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore. I learned something in those evenings. When you lose everything you thought mattered, you start seeing what actually does. Peace isn't some grand event. It doesn't arrive with a bow or an apology. It's the quiet acceptance that the past no longer deserves a seat at your table. I never dated again. Didn't want to. Not because I didn't believe in love, but because I finally understood that love isn't about what you give up for someone. It's about what you refuse to lose of yourself. Some nights, I'd still hear echoes. Lydia's laugh, Evan's fake charm, the sound of old deals being made in boardrooms that no longer existed. But they faded faster each time. And one evening, as I locked up the new workshop, smaller, simpler, but mine, I realized something that stayed with me ever since. When everything burns down, you get to choose what rises again, and I chose silence, peace, and truth. No more lies dressed as love. No more noise pretending to be success. Just the steady rhythm of a hammer. the hum of the world moving on, and a man who finally learned that the best revenge isn't destroying them, it's outliving them, quietly, completely, and without looking back. It's been 5 years now. 5 years of mornings that don't start with an argument. 5 years of quiet that no longer cuts like a blade but settles like warm bread on the table. The house is smaller, the rooms rearranged to fit a life that's simpler, less showy. I moved some of the tools into the garage and turned the back room into a space where I keep plans and notebooks instead of receipts and ledgers. There's a little pot of rosemary on the windowsill that I never used to keep. Now I water it on the days I notice the sky is blue, and remember to be grateful for light that isn't overhead stage lighting or courtroom flashes. Sometimes the past taps on the window. It's funny the things memory grabs hold of. The exact cadence of Lydia's laugh when she'd actually been happy. The way her head would settle on my shoulder during a movie we barely watched. The small gestures that once meant everything. Those images come quick and clear, like film frames you can't help but replay. For a few seconds, the heart forgets the ledger, forgets the forged signatures, forgets the way silence that night in the diner felt like a paragraph closing on a chapter. In those flashes, I almost mourned the person I thought she was. And then, almost like someone turning on a light, the rest of me remembers. That version of her was a design, not a person. It was the role she chose to wear for a long while, and the real shape beneath it was different. People ask me if I regret the way I handled it, if I wish I'd taken the dramatic road, the headlines, the interviews, the televised confession. They picture a man on stage tearing up photographs or screaming the truth until someone hears him. I tell them no. Not because I'm cold or unforgiving, but because the most profound reckoning I needed was never public. The truth, when it's true, doesn't require applause. They destroyed themselves in private through habits, greed, and the kind of small betrayals that accumulate into ruin. I didn't have to pull the curtain back for the world to see. I just stopped propping it up. Sometimes the quiet withdrawal of support from someone you used to protect is a punishment harsher than any courtroom. It's the closure that arrives when you stop trading your presence for their comfort. If I learned one thing through all of it, through the sleepless nights with the folder on my lap, through the hearings and the empty chairs at company meetings, it's this. Love that needs to be weaponized in order to be felt is not love at all. It's a transaction. It's a ledger in human form, with credits and debits and a balance sheet of favors expected in return. Real love doesn't forge signatures or hide money. It doesn't trade on your name or use your kindness as a pass to take what it wants. Real love shows up messy and imperfect and still handholds through the hard stuff without needing to mark the favor paid. There were days in the aftermath when I thought I'd never be able to trust myself. How do you tell when your perception is accurate and when it's colored by hurt? How do you know that suspicion isn't just bitterness wearing the face of wisdom? I relearned how to listen, not to the voice that shouted for revenge or the one that whispered for public vindication, but to the steady, small voice that asked, "Is this true?" And then waited for proof. That voice led me back to my hands. It led me back to the workbench, to the smell of fresh-cut wood, to the rhythm of a hammer striking a nail. There, in repetition and honest labor, I found a kind of truth that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I didn't date again. I didn't need to. Not out of stubbornness or self-punishment, but because rebuilding didn't leave room for anything superficial. The years taught me to be picky about where I put my energy and who I let live inside the rooms of my life. I watched friends who rushed into rebound relationships make the same mistakes the second time around. Mistakes that might have been avoided with a little more stillness. Maybe someday I'll let someone sit in my porch light again. Maybe I won't. What matters is that for the first time since my 20s, that decision would come from a place of choice, not lack. People say revenge eats the avenger. I won't lie, there's a cost. It took time for me to stop cataloging every kindness as a potential bribe, to stop expecting a ledger behind every dinner or compliment. That suspicion is a residue. It doesn't wash out quickly, but slowly it fades when you fill your day with things that aren't about them. I started mentoring a couple of the young guys who showed up at the shop looking for honest work, teaching them how to read a blueprint, how to use the circular saw without panic. You'd be surprised how healing it is to pass on the knowledge that once kept someone else from falling into the same traps. It felt like repairing something in myself by helping someone else not break. There were practical things, too. Lawsuits were settled in their messy legal way. Assets were divided, some sold off, some frozen longer than anyone liked. Evan's name became a cautionary headline in trade newsletters. Lydia, if she ever thought of home again, couldn't knock on the door that once welcomed her. I heard bits and pieces over the years, an auction here, a quiet move there, rumors that meant little because the truth of it was quieter and more precise than gossip could make it seem. The court didn't restore the years of labor. It only returned the balance sheet, the financial truth that matched the one I'd seen with my own eyes. That was enough. If you're listening and you feel like your love is being used as currency, if someone you care for keeps tallying what you do while hiding debts against your name, then this is what I'd tell you. Start small and slow. Don't make a spectacle of your hurt. Collect the truth quietly, and build your own life away from the stage they're performing on. Silence is not surrender. It's a recalibration. It's choosing to stop answering the phone when the caller uses you like a line item. It's walking out of a room and letting the echo of your absence do what shouts cannot. And if you can, keep one hand on honest work, the kind that shows you who you are when nobody's watching. I still find moments that sting. Sometimes a song will bring a memory, one of those old country tunes she used to hum, and the nostalgia will hit like a cold draft. But the sting is more a reminder now, not an omen.